Hello, I'm Alba Fernández from the University of Burgos, and today I will be discussing the topic Aging, Wisdom and Resistance, Rereading Systemary in Langston Hughes, The Sweet Flypaper of Life. This presentation will explore how Hughes and the Caravas work challenges and redefines the stereotypical image of the mummy figure through a combination of text and image. I will also argue that the text reclaims aging, and specifically the figure of the elderly black woman, as a site both of wisdom, cultural memory, and everyday resistance. In 1955, Langston Hughes, who was at that time a prominent figure of the Harlem Renaissance, and Roy de Carava, a celebrated photographer, collaborated on The Sweet Flypaper of Life. This innovative work combined Hughes' poetic prose with de Carava's striking black and white photographs to create a very vivid depiction of life in Harlem. Together, they published The Sweet Flypaper of Life in 1955, a groundbreaking work that combined their talents to offer a unique perspective on life in Harlem. The story goes that Langston Hughes met Roy de Carava by accident on a street corner in uptown Manhattan in 1954 and was so taken by his photographs of everyday life in Harlem that he took them straight to his publishers. Simon & Schuster, his publishers at the time, agreed to go ahead only if Hughes, who by then had published already several works, provided an accompanying text to the pictures. The result, which first appeared the following year, was a hybrid book that is now recognized as a pioneering exercise in merging image and text, as well as revealing glimpses into the everyday life of Harlem's black community. My objective today is to examine how this work subverts the controlling image of the mummy figure and focus on what happens when this mummy-like figure is reread through aging and knowledge. Sister Mary, who is the narrator and is an elderly woman, is not presented as decline but as a narrative authority and embodies archive of Harlem life and is somehow a generator of meaning. In that sense, her voice becomes a form of creative labor. She doesn't only tell the community, but she interprets it, curates it, and projects it from reductive readings. Because the book is narrated by her, an elderly, working-class black woman, the collaboration also raises a key question. Who gets to speak for Harlem? And Sister Mary's narration places aging black womanhood at the center of representation, where it becomes not only an object to be looked at, but a perspective that structures how we looked at it. One of the themes in The Sweet Flypaper of Life is family and community, and this is highlighted in the strength and support that is found within these relationships. Sister Mary's role as elder makes kinship legible as a knowledge system. This is the one who knows, remembers, and also connects. Another topic is resilience and survival. Sister Mary's resilience is specifically tied to longevity, surviving a structural hardship long enough to narrate it and refusing to be reduced to pain or victimhood. Cultural pride and identity is filtered throughout the authority of age because Sister Mary speaks as a custodian of community values and as a producer of cultural memory. Tension and continuity is also present throughout the book, and her elder gaze measures change across decades, which makes the book's social critique historically grounded rather than momentary. And of course, the everyday life and joy of Harlem, right? Importantly, her narration here suggests that joy is not naivete. It can function as a strategy of endurance, a quiet form of resistance that is embedded in the everyday. The mummy archetype portrays African American women as nurturing, wise, obedient, and self-sacrificing, particularly in service to white families. This image has been deeply ingrained in North American culture and has significantly shaped the perceptions of African American women, often limiting their roles to that of caregivers and domestic workers. The mummy was one of the most pervasive stereotypes constructed during the post-Civil War, and it is arguably the most enduring image from the days of the Jim Crow. appearing as a staple caricature in the romanticization of the antebellum South. It was popularized in the 20th century by characters that we all know, such as the one played by Hayley McDaniel in Gone with the Wind. This archetype of black domestic servitude was often depicted as good-natured, overweight, and also loud. But the mummy presented an ahistorical view of black womanhood within southern plantation hierarchies, and not only unfairly embellished the realities of black life in the American South, but somehow also denied African American women their femininity, their beauty, and their inner strength. Few American icons have been as comforting or as destructive as the Black Mummy. Here also is where aging matters. The mummy stereotype depends on a particular use of age. Older black women are imagined as safely non-threatening, naturally nurturing, and politically harmless. So one of the stakes of this book is whether Sister Mary's elderly status is used to neutralize her or instead to empower her. My argument is that Hughes evokes the stereotype, but he also reclaims the figure of the elderly black woman as a thinking subject. Sister Mary's wisdom is not just folksy warmth, it becomes interpretation, it becomes critique, and it also becomes critical authority. In the sweet Flypaper of Life, Hughes introduces Sister Mary Bradley as the narrator, and at first glance, Sister Mary seems to embody the mummy archetype. She's an elderly African-American woman who appears nurturing and wise and somehow fitting perfectly this traditional image. And in fact, the introduction to Sister Mary on the opening pages of the narrative helps define her as such, as she declines to receive St. Peter's summons to heaven, saying, and I quote, Boy, take that wire right on back to St. Peter, because I'm not prepared to go. I might be a little sick, but as yet I ain't no ways tired. I got plenty time to come home when I get to be 80, 90, or 101. She's cheerful, full of chest, and scornful of weakness, all characteristics that a good mummy should have somehow. Grammatical inaccuracies here and subtle humor has a soothing effect that could put at ease white readers who sought the comfort of superiority. Through her words, what emerges is an intimate portrait of a close-knit community on the point of great change at social level. And I quote, "Tenements torn down and project housing building," writes Hughes in the resigned voice of Sister Mary. Some folks selling, other folks buying, somebody always passing, coming and going, picket lines picketing, and at night street meetings on the corner, talking about buy black, Africa for the Africans. Hughes chose to evoke the Harlem in the 1940s and early 50s through the eyes of Sister Mary Bradley, whose stoical lyricism speak volumes about her neighborhood and the wider North America of the time. Her gaze and that of the photographer, of the Carava, moves from the personal, who is her family, her neighbors, her wayward grandson Rodney, also the girlfriends of Rodney, and outwards to the neighbor characters, the children, the streets, the disappearing tenements, and the newly built housing projects. The political and social tumult of the 1960s, what was to come, the civil rights protests, brutal state violence, the emergence of the Black Power movement, the race riots, is still a decade away, but there are auguries here of what is to come. And in her first spoken passage, Sister Mary insists that she will stay on earth until she sees, and I quote, what this integration the Supreme Court has decreed is going to be like. Later, she compares the political effort that was required to reach that same Supreme Court decision with her experience of the New York rush hour subway, which, and I quote, mixes everybody, white, black, Gentile, and you, closer than you ever are to your relatives. Everything here is implied, nothing is really overstated. You can see that in very simple terms, she describes the New York rush hour subject as a place where people from all backgrounds, regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity, are packed together more closely than they could be with their own family members. However, as the narrative evolves, Sister Mary's narrative is more complex than it appears at surface level. Rather than relegating Sister Mary to the realm of stereotypical mummy, Hughes has created what Paul Giamo terms a hyper-ethnicized narrator. The character traits of the hyper-ethnicized narrator are exaggerated to reflect a stereotype, therefore they are critiqued. Giamo claims that this exaggeration exists only, and I quote, to further a positive representation of the racial group and subtly engage in social critique. This is done using a method called refracted intention, which is a term also called by this scholar, where what has been said on the surface, often in everyday speech, seems simple, but actually has a deeper meaning that becomes clear through another character's point of view. This stereotype is evoked not only to be refuted, and Giamo claims that the role of the narrator is to provide a form of, and I quote, social commentary on issues immediately relevant to the narrator's own group and issues which encompass but go beyond racial or ethnic concerns. On a more anecdotic note, this is also something that Hughes does with his character Jess Be Simple, who is not who he seems to be. He's a kind of Harlem jukebox philosopher who presents a kind of folk wisdom about current events and fairly complex cultural realities from his own perspective. Sister Mary fits snugly into this type of hyper-ethnicized narrator, and her character somehow recalls Hughes' Just Be Simple. Sister Mary can be further identified as a trickster figure, a trope in African American culture, and especially in its oral tradition. The trickster plays with both symbolic and real meanings, making the story change the way truth and meaning are understood all the time. And Sister Mary manipulates the text so as to suggest one thing and then imply another. To clarify here what's at stake, I'm also drawing on Black feminist thought, especially Patricia Hill Collins' analysis of the controlling images, and on intersectionality in Kimberly Crenshaw's sense. Sister Mary is read at the crossing of race, gender, class, and age. And this intersection really matters here because the mummy stereotype works precisely by collapsing those categories into a single naturalized role: caretaker, servant, and background figure. Hughes reopens those categories and turns Sister Mary into a complex subject. Her narration becomes a counter-narrative because she validates experiences that are racialized, gendered, working class, and non-normative without asking permission from dominant standards of beauty, femininity, or power. Resistance here is not always loud, it is often interpretive, and it's how she frames people, how she refuses pity, how she insists on dignity, and how she claims her own old voice. In this first example, Sister Mary's voice may sound plain-spoken and rooted in folksy wisdom, but it operates through signifying, which is a trickster strategy. When she says things like, and I quote, "kids don't lean on the piano no more," she's pointing to shifting values between generations, right? This photo that you can see here speaks volumes beyond the narrator. The man with the eyes closed, mid-gesture, captures an embodied emotion, perhaps spiritual, musical, or reflective, and it adds weight and feeling of generational change. But what is especially important here is the anchoring voice that belongs to the elderly Black woman. That choice turns Sister Mary in an epistemic center. She's not simply captioning images, she's producing meaning, curating memory, and guiding interpretation. In this second example, when Sister Mary says, and I quote, "where ration ain't no part of his nature," it seems casual, even nostalgic, but there is social critique, and she's very possibly referring to a philosophy of endurance, typical of oppressed societies that are rooted in survival and not complaint, a kind of quiet resilience. Her words here downplay the situation, right? And I read, "they got 5 children, 2 is twins." But the intensity and alertness in the children's eyes invite us to feel more, to see vulnerability, strength, hope, and somehow we can see uncertainty in their eyes. By supplying a text to go along with the images, Hughes engages in what Roland Barthes calls the anchorage of meaning, which I have mentioned before, which is a visual image is when a visual image is basically radically elusive and can convey a variety of meanings. A text attached to an image controls the reader's reception, and I quote, as the text directs the reader through the signified of the image, causing him to avoid some and receive others. Despite the fact that the layout of the book directs the gaze towards the images, Hughes' text, read literally or documentarily, modifies the richness and complexity of the Carava's photos. And we can say without any kind of hesitation that the combination of Hughes' prose and the Carava's photographs creates a dynamic interaction that engages the audience in a critical and very constructive act of meaning-making. For instance, a photograph of children playing in the scrape of a fire hydrant is paired with Sister Mary's commentary on her grandson and Rodney, who is described as the first to open the hydrants each summer. Sister Mary's plain phrasing that you can read here is part of her wisdom. She registers generational change without moral panic, which is itself a resistant stance against the stereotypes that frame Harlem life as only disordered or lacking of seriousness, let's say. Here, in this pair of black and white photographs, we see a woman first standing with her arms raised in what looks like a kitchen, and then sitting down with her face blocked out. On its own, the image could mean a lot of things, right? It's open to many interpretations. But the caption underneath, written by Sister Mary, and I quote, "Or like my daughter, Ellen's daughter, whose name is Ellen too," this gives it a specific direction. As Roland Barthes would say, the text anchors here the meaning, once again, nudging us to see this not just a random moment, but also as a part of a family story. This is also where an elder narrator matters, because Sister Mary's perspective makes generation visible, how women are repeated, remembered, and sometimes erased across time. And her narration at the same time quietly insists that these lives are worth naming and worth seeing through the pictures. In conclusion, Hughes and the Caravas' The Sweet Flypaper of Life effectively subverts the control image of the mommy archetype by presenting a complex and empowering portrayal of Sister Mary. And this work challenges and redefines perceptions of African American women and grandmothers, highlighting their strength, their resilience, and their central role in their communities. My main contribution here is to emphasize that this subversion happens through aging. Sister Mary's old age is not a limitation, but a platform for authority, creativity, and cultural narration. Her voice produces a counter-narrative that expands literary imaginaries beyond conventional ideas of beauty and ideas of power. Further, in future research could explore aging and elderhood as Black feminist epistemologies, and precisely how elderly narrators create meaning, sustain memory, and enact everyday forms of resistance. This is all. Thank you very much for your attention.